reflect on Guaido's past year, his year in review, his year as a wannabe president. We've compiled a list of the top 5 fail moments. And we wanted to start with a pretty recent incident, actually, when he was filmed on the street. I believe it was after a raid on the home of an opposition lawmaker who was accused of participating in the planning of a coup attempt, an actual attack on a Venezuelan military base. The individuals who were soldiers who were going to carry out that attack have fled to Brazil. Brazil is refusing to hand over those individuals to the Venezuelan government, yet there was a lawmaker who was accused of being involved. And when authorities arrived at her apartment, Guaido was there. He appeared to be a little intoxicated, and he ended up having a kind of awkward encounter with his supporters on the street.
¿Hay alguna orden por lo menos? ¿Han expuesto ustedes, vale? No lo saben, pero ustedes que están
muy millonarios. Me voy a disculpar. Huele demasiado a licor.
Lo que tú digas.
Huele demasiado a licor. Le agradezco que no me hable porque huele a licor. Huele a licor. Huele a licor. Huele a licor.
Imagínense, un viernes en la noche de Navidad, ojalá oliera licor, pero no hay ni para comprarlo.
Tell us exactly what happened. What is the status of the plot and everything which led up to that moment, and what happened in this video?
Well, yeah, that's a long one. The funny thing about the video, which is when it also went viral, but as most of things Guaido, they just go viral for a long time, for a short time, and then it goes back into oblivion. But the thing is that we have like this major plot was thwarted before the end of the year. Actually, part of it was thwarted and part of it was actually revealed because there was this major incident in the border, south of the border, in the southern Bolivar state border, which is borders with Brazil. And there was this attempt to take over a garrison, a barrack a military post in the Gran Sabana district, which actually they were successful at first at taking some weaponry and everything else, and they were and run away. Afterwards, most of the weapons cache was actually recovered, and some of the people were detained, and some of them also ran away to Brazil and actually gave themselves to Brazilian authorities. What came afterwards? I mean, after this, another end of the year kind of military uprising failed, which was actually trying to what the government said was they were trying to bring down a Colombian military plane, as in some false flag kind of thing. But the crazy thing about these guys is these are the guys that part of them were involved in the April 30th coup attempt. And they were actually hidden, in this case, if I'm not mistaken, the Panama embassy and some other Latin American group or Lima group embassies. And they were able to cross the border in Colombia. They were taken back then to Ecuador. From Ecuador, they were taken to Peru when they have another meeting with her on logistics and everything else. And they were taken from Peru to Roraima state in northern Amazonia in Brazil, and from there they actually went into Venezuela. So you have like this major coordinated operation that tried to stage something new that was once again was thwarted thanks to security and the government, and also to their own hubris, I guess. So if I'm not mistaken, this is in that context that they're giving all when they actually end up grilling Guaido that was there. And the thing about this
he happened to be at the home of this opposition lawmaker who's accused of helping plan this attack.
Yeah, it wasn't Gilbert Caro in this case, which is also under arrest. I forgot the name of that lawmaker, what Guaido was. But the thing about this video is when they actually he's been confronted by his own people. I mean, he's confronted by people who are not even close to Chavismo. And they're asking for questions. They want to know, they want to understand what's going on, what happened, everything else. And then they sense and they perceive that he's actually kind of talking funny. So they start realizing that he actually not only is talking, he was talking funny. He was also smelling funny. So they just realize they actually tell him, you stink of liquor and you're drunk and everything else. And Guaido says this kind of mercurial phrase when he says, "But it's what he said something like it's on a Christmas night. I'm not even able to get drunk because I have no money to buy the booze or something, some stupid phrase like that." And
it wasn't Christmas quite yet.
No, it was like a week before Christmas. That's his thing. Yeah, like I think somewhere 5 days a week.
It's the 12 days of Christmas. You just get drunk every night.
Exactly, and at least Friday night. I mean, we can cut him some slack and believe him if he doesn't get drunk from Monday to Thursday. But I'm pretty sure that Friday wasn't different from some other Fridays because there's also nice footage around of how he likes to spend on Fridays or special moments or whatever on the internet when he looks pretty jammed up, you know.
We'll get to some of the more instances when he looked pretty jammed up, to say the least. But the number 4 memorable moment of Guaido, also fairly recently in November, he was leading this push to make the 16th of the month, the 16th of November, this massive day of protest against the dictatorship. He did this video where he was in front of a green screen and kind of looked like a used car salesman trying to convince people to come out to his dealership and get a really nice deal on a 2004 Ford Focus or something like that. I don't know, but he was really hyping it up, saying November 16th, this is the big day. And he was asked by reporters, well, what happens after November 16th?
Exactly. And what he says immediately is trying to answer to the expectation. Well, after then, it comes this, November the 17th. And after November the 17th comes the 18th.
Vendrá el 17 de noviembre y el 18.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way he solved that in like a way. And then
that's
he tried
a man that I see leading a country.
Exactly. We have to take in mind. We have to bear in mind something else, which is it's as stupid as what we're going to tell about this as follows. But because the main motto for those days, what Juan Guaidó tried to say is that if we're not able to get our own Christmas, neither would they, as in the government. And actually, I don't know what went wrong in that focus group where they thought that the best thing to do during the second and third week of November is to actually threat Venezuelan end year, which is one of those. It's like a sacred moment. I mean, people really. They actually relax and have fun for like a month. I mean, and it actually was a lot better than before, a year before. I'm talking about the December 2018. I mean, it was pretty much different. Things were incredibly and unexpectedly and surprisingly nicer. I mean, there was a pretty nice.
You're talking about this past December. Things have improved, and that's what I've heard from multiple people who live in Caracas and have spent time there. Well, moving on from that very intelligent, high-level moment of Guaido, let's talk about April 30th. That's going to be our number 3 most memorable moment of Guaido. When he somehow was able to break Leopoldo Lopez, the lead figure in the Venezuelan opposition and Voluntad Popular, out of house arrest, where he's serving a sentence over his actions in 2015 during the La Salida campaign, when he actually encouraged demonstrators to attack government buildings, and then shortly thereafter they attempted to light the Attorney General's office on fire. So Leopoldo Lopez, he's serving this sentence for essentially encouraging acts of terror against the Venezuelan state. Yet he's somehow in this magnificent dictatorship broken out of his home and then ends up in the street with Juan Guaidó, the person claiming to be the president of the country for, at that point, about 4 months. And they lead a ragtag team of about 30-some soldiers and claim that they're taking over the government in a military coup, and it fails dramatically. We know that as a result of that day, President Donald Trump in the United States actually started to yell at his national security team and say, you've been duped by the Venezuelan opposition. I thought this was supposed to be easy. You guys lied to me. I mean, that's been reported in the Washington Post. So tell us the significance of this day, April 30th in Venezuela. You call it the banana coup. Why?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most famous images of that moment was actually, bear in mind another thing. Remember we talked about the how Guaidó staged the whole thing today. This is the first time they had tried that. I mean, they said they were taking over the Francisco de Miranda Air Base in eastern Caracas.
Yeah.
But they actually placed themselves next to it because they actually weren't able to take it. So they placed themselves next to it in a highway connection next to the airport. But they started streaming from there as if they were actually rising and they were already taking over the air base. But things went south quite fast for them. And they only had like this major moment of when the first picture of Guaidó and Leopoldo López. From that moment on, it all fizzled out. But during the whole action, because it also had some violent moments, with all these people in must be like I have a meter in mind, so it must be something like 300 meters stretch of road where they were based. The Guaidó and all the heroes, quote unquote heroes, and the National Guards and others that actually took part in this strange Mel Brookian kind of coup attempt. The main image, back to the point, it's one machine gun lying in the defense of the bridge, and a crate with bananas inside it. And so from that moment on, everyone asked what those bananas were for. And of course, it became a source of memes in Venezuela, just for as in selling that they're selling those bananas and some extremely local jokes that are going to be easy to explain. But I mean, it became one of the biggest memes of that day, but not the only one. I think that's also important of the images that were produced that day. And I think about that the Guaidó Bolton phone call face. You know what I mean?
When he's on the phone holding it like, what do you guys make me do?
Yeah, it's like he looks.
Mom, can you come pick me up?
Yeah, he's so frightened. I mean, he looks like, well, yeah, he looks like he soiled himself or something. He was like he seemed like a person actually realizing in what kind of, when in between a rock and a hard place he's in right at that moment. I mean, what type of situation he's actually in. And maybe some part of his life went through his eyes, I don't know. But the funny thing about that moment also is that this actually could also be named as the Leopoldo López private coup, because actually this was something that was kind of an offshoot from a major plot, a more carefully planned one, but it was like precipitated by Leopoldo, it was financed by Leopoldo López, and it had like a tragic side to it, because as you all remember, the Minister of Defense and the head of the Supreme Court and other high officials actually duped also the CIA and telling them that they were in this new plot to free Leopoldo and to bring down Maduro and to take the country over to transition and to be pardoned by the U.S. and be de-sanctioned or whatever, to be waived by the sanctions that the U.S. imposed on them. But one of the high officials, or the general who actually was the head of the SEBIN, the National the Secret Service, and he actually went with the whole coup and he ran away. I mean, so that's why actually they were able to release Leopoldo, because they paid some of these agents that were under Figueras, Manuel Christopher Figueras, which is the general's name, orders, and they released Leopoldo López. That's the only way. And the other important thing about this day is how Leopoldo ends up now being in the residence of the Spanish embassy in Caracas. And who drove them there? Because that's the other thing. When things went pretty sour, he disappeared. And they were saying, they say that the government had him, where's Leopoldo, and he disappeared and whatever. He was actually taken by the but with a Chilean embassy vehicle to the Spanish ambassador residence in Caracas. So
And that
another
really
thing,
says a lot about the Venezuelan opposition, that he would have to, Leopoldo Lopez, that he would have to end up in the ambassador's residence of the main imperial power in Venezuela.
well, that's a nice symbolical gesture. And bear in mind also that Leopoldo Lopez's father is actually an MEP in the European Parliament now with the Partido Popular from Spain. So it's kind of like a logical connection, and also this also has to do with capital and that kind of things. And it also has to do on who gives them this clout and for whom, because Leopoldo is definitely the U.S. guy, not Guaidó, as we can clearly see these days and this last weeks. And the other lesson taken from that day is that it, at least nominally, it ends up the joke about not being a coup in the U.S. because there's no U.S. embassy, because there wasn't any U.S. embassy functioning in Caracas. But all the Grupo de Lima Group countries, embassies such as Chile, Peru, Panama, and so forth, actually did participate. So we don't even need a U.S. embassy for a coup here right now.
Yeah, they have a healthy supply of marionettes throughout the region, which the U.S. can activate on its behalf when it comes to policy on Venezuela. It's amazing, actually, when you think about it now, the fact that Guaido was standing there with that look on his face. You're saying he probably realized he was in trouble at that point, because in any other normal country, if you lead an armed military uprising against the government, you would be in jail. I mean, in the United States, if that happened, I think you'd be lucky to make it behind bars, because they would probably ice you in the street for leading that kind of insurrection. And yet Guaido, again, in this authoritarian dictatorship, is still running around and getting drunk and jumping over fences. So it's quite the dictatorship you have there, Diego. I'm pretty impressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's so dangerous that we actually are going to let him do all the job and just bring himself down without any need of us of the government or the Chavismo to do anything.
Let's talk about our second most memorable moment of Guaido's year as wannabe president. On February 23rd, that was when I was actually in Venezuela. I think we were probably together that day in Caracas at some point, or at least spent a lot of time together.
We saw afterwards. Yeah, we did.
And this was the day the United States was promising to deliver aid, humanitarian aid, to the Venezuelan people through the border of Táchira on the Venezuelan side and Cúcuta on the Colombian side. It was essentially a day the United States was threatening to invade Venezuela, use military force to push these trucks across the sovereign border of the country. That failed completely. My colleague Max Blumenthal documented immediately how it was clear armed Colombians and perhaps even opposition thugs on the Colombian side ended up burning the trucks, the aid trucks in Colombia, and sabotaging the delivery. The New York Times eventually confirmed that reporting, and it's looked back on as a complete failure of U.S. policy. But Guaido somehow mysteriously appeared on the other side of the border that day, in spite of the fact that there was a freeze on his international travel as a result of the fact he was leading an insurrection against the government. And anyway, he gets over the border. There's this great video of him jogging. I made it in Colombia. Look, here we are. And then it comes out a few months later, what many of us suspected at the time, that he was brought over the border with the help of some good old-fashioned Colombian drug dealers. What can you tell us about that story?
The February 23rd episode, meaning you can, it gives like, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. You have to, there's always new things appearing of what happened that day and the consequences of that day, because you have to remember also what happened to all the money that supposedly there was allegedly invested in this whole event in Cúcuta.
Richard Branson had this big concert for humanitarian assistance to Venezuela. They raised millions of dollars, and then even opposition papers exposed that it was used to what? Buy expensive hotel rooms and prostitutes?
Well, that was one of them, yes, and also by the nightclubs in Spain and some other places, and there's and actually, well, some of them are just simply disappeared. But the prostitute case, it's something that Freddy Superlano did, and Freddy Superlano it's a guy now. He was like the anti-corruption watchdog in the National Assembly. This is the most tragic comical of all, because that day. Freddy Superlano, which is an MP from Barinas and also from Voluntad Popular Party. Well, I mean, he seemed he was having a very good time with his cousin and some prostitutes from Colombia. So they went like these two guys and two prostitutes once to a motel in Cúcuta, which is the city next to in the Colombian border next to Venezuela. And they were. I don't know actually what's the name for that in English. They were given this escopolamina, burundanga, which is something that actually makes you be obedient, and it's a drug. It's a drug they use a lot to steal people, because you lose all sense of will, and they're gonna just use you, and you can go
like the date rape drug.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's the same. It's the same. That's what they used against them. The Superlano's cousin died, but Freddy Superlano didn't, and so he was actually afterwards he was rewarded with being this the anti-corruption watchdog of the Guaidó in this past year. The thing is that these weren't just your typical, or maybe they are. I don't know, because that's something that's actually changing a lot and getting worse, especially in Colombia and Mexico. But this is actually the people that helped him out to cross the border were the los rastrojos. Rastrojos would be like the remains. That has a reason to be named that way, which is one of the most violent narco-paramilitary organizations in Colombia. In this case, and actually, it was not even just middle officials. I mean, they were high cadre there also, receiving Guaidó and taking pictures with Guaidó, at least 3 or 4 of them, and that actually unleashed another state of violence inside the Rastrojos afterwards, because one of them gave himself to the authorities, and so the family of this guy that was under the authorities' control actually was threatened, and they killed some of them, family members. The whole terrible, classic paramilitary Colombian violence. But and also to the Colombian government. So in order to the Colombian government pick up Guaidó by helicopter and take him to the rally point in Cúcuta, this Rastrojos actually threw out a 24-hour curfew. People on the township where they arrived weren't able to actually leave their own homes in order to actually bring over Guaidó and to control the security in that way. And from that point, I mean, Los Rastrojos made this service to not only to Guaidó, but also to the Colombian government that went to pick Guaidó up in the helicopter right there in a soccer field in the small township there. And that's where they picked Guaidó. So you have like this, something that the only way it could have happened, it's thanks to Colombian narco-paramilitary drug dealers that actually are pretty violent on both sides of the border. And in some points back last year and other years also, there have been strong confrontation with the Venezuelan army at some point. Not I mean, skirmishes, not big things, but nevertheless they're delicate enough, or extrajudicial killings or kidnapping.
Yeah.
Anything. I mean, but and on the Colombian side, which is different, they have the whole population hostage, which is actually pretty tragic, because it's also with compliance of the Colombian government and the regional government. I mean, that's what actual NGOs on the ground, the real NGOs, not the humanitarian industrial Western complex. And we were talking about real small NGOs that actually do the risk their lives a lot, and they actually do the work on denouncing the paramilitary, are the ones that actually show the pictures with first. one of these organizations from Cucuta was the one that actually got the picture and they showed it to the world. So this brings over how much you have to do to build up this fake government and do this parapolitical stunt, this parastate, just to call someone president because of the whims of some U.S. government administration.
Mm-hmm. And it's important for the U.S. context as well, because we hear constantly about the Venezuelan government being a narco dictatorship, yet we never actually see evidence of that. There's no coca industry in Venezuela that can compare to what's going on in Colombia. And then we see Juan Guaidó smuggled across the border with the help of Colombian narco traffickers. What does it tell you about the kind of government Guaido would lead in Venezuela? I mean, it's all right there on the table for everyone to see, as plain as day.
What happened in Bolivia in that case? Bolivia also was a narco coup also, and it was built up on narco lines and narco secessionist lines because of Santa Cruz. But it's the same thing. Just think about how things in Bolivia, it would be different. But I don't know how the government, the coup government, would operate. I think Bolivia is pretty much a good example because it's kind of working on the same lines. And then you saw they also have their own self-proclaimed president, a woman in this case. So there's no gender gap there. So it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty tragic in a sense that this is actually the only way they're able to do it.
It is, and when we talk about and think about the fact that Guaido was smuggled across the border with the help of cocaine traffickers, it's pretty interesting to see this picture of him that was actually taken while he was in Cucuta. Where, I mean, I'm not saying that I know what it looks like when someone's on cocaine, but there's this thing called coke jaw.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got it. He's got it in the picture. In his eyes, I mean, those pupils.
He's pretty jammed.
He's jammed up, ready to go. He's like, yeah, man, he reminds me of like a frat guy at a university party in the United States who's maybe had one too many shots, played too much beer pong, and done a few lines of cocaine and is running around and telling everyone, I'm president, man, yeah. Did you hear?
Yeah, the crazy thing is that the only difference is that you have the U.S. government backing it and saying that he is.
Yeah.
Only the U.S. government, that's the crazy part. I mean, does it take so much? I mean, I was thinking of that frat guy you were describing. Actually, is it worth the money, that kind of people? I guess it does. Because, you know why? Because it's also a way to actually tie the noose on them, too.
Yeah.
Because they already have a case on them, and they have a case on Guaido. Well, certainly, they do after all this embezzlement and frauds we saw last year. And the other thing I was thinking about with the whole Guaido thing is that those pictures actually were a commitment between Guaido and Los Rastrojos. I mean, this was kind of like a bona fide proof that they were going to work together once Guaido is actually the president. Mm-hmm. That was part of the deal. That was a deal. Those pictures also talk about a deal making between the Venezuelan opposition and Los Rastrojos. I mean, the most violent criminals in the border and maybe in the whole northern part of Southern America. And those are the guys that are making the deal with Guaido.
And when it comes to the U.S. government support, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida was down in Cucuta during that time. And one of the things I remember most clearly was how odd it was. He was just tweeting at almost every hour of the night, all night, when on the evening of the failed aid delivery. He was tweeting and he was really amped up. He was tweeting out pictures of Gaddafi and saying that he was essentially threatening Maduro with murder. And I don't know, maybe him and Guaido were enjoying some of the same product because they were amped up.
And when Rubio went emotional, I think that's different. He went full emotional in all those tweets, and it actually resembles that. I mean, it's like he was like trolling a couple, that kind of vibe when you're actually, just saying mean things about your most recent and failed relationship. It's kind of like those lines. that Rubio was kind of talking. I don't know.
He
He was
couldn't.
like a,
He couldn't control his emotions, his feelings.
correct. Yeah, that's what.
They were both out of their mind completely, I guess.
Yeah, and not only that. I mean, Rubio could know a thing or two about those Colombians also, you know,
Yes.
and also those Cubans that also have those good
Yes.
relationships with those Colombians, etc., etc.
Actually,
So it's part of the same family.
Marco Rubio, and I hope to do a more in-depth segment on this later, but Marco Rubio's brother-in-law is actually someone who was a confirmed major cocaine trafficker in Miami, dealing with Colombian drug lords, and was running an operation out of Miami when Marco Rubio was a teenager. Marco Rubio was working out of the house, living in the house, staying in the house, where there was this major cocaine operation, and Rubio claims he had no idea what was going on, and that, you know, the fact that this brother-in-law funded his senatorial campaign and all that is, of course, just a side story, nothing to see there. But moving on to number 5, the final Guaido moment. Jumping over the fence.
Yeah, that's the.
Staging this incident to say he was blocked. Where do things go from here, Diego?
Doesn't have like an Iwo Jima kind of air that Guaido climbing the fence, you know, as they're trying to do the last heroical stand, you know, like the last charge of the brigade before the cavalry. I'm sorry, before I don't know before it ends, but So what comes after this, I think it's definitely, this is officially that moment, that image, not being able to actually cross the fence, which it's not that high if you've been there, and being gently brought back down to the original side of the fence and just not being able to reach his objective. I think that's the testament image. That's the image that sums it up. I think that's the moment that describes the whole what really meant symbolically and metaphorically the Guaidos, this strange Mel Brookian kind of Beverly Hills 90210 reality political Guaido cycle we had last year. I mean, it's one of the weirdest moments in history ever. And with that, I mean, let's not lose something out of perspective either. He may have done all these stupid things and not able to achieve anything directly, but they also did a lot of harm. As the whole, I mean, they stole a lot of money. They actually tightened the noose on the sanctions attempt and all the economic terrorism and so forth. So it's tragically, I mean, it would be even funnier if that part didn't happen, where we always just stay with the whole clown shenanigans we saw next to what really was tragic along these lines. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm not going to say, you know, with a high voice, I'm not going to sentence this is the actual definitive end of Guaido, but it pretty much seems like it anyway. And I don't think he's going to be able to actually lift something after this. You know, one more time, it'll all depend on what the U.S. does. Mm-hmm. And if they want to keep Guaido going, please do. I mean, there's a whole country right next to that that's actually interested in actually getting into normalcy back one more time and actually having an opposition that maybe we don't. I mean, Paris, it's not. I don't know. I mean, it's no. I mean, he's no Simón Bolívar, no Francisco Miranda at all. He's much closer to Guaido than is to actually to anyone else. And I mean, the kind of Weltanschauung, the kind of worldview they might have. But if they're all willing just to ease things up a little and become an opposition that's actually able to do a little bit more of politics, I mean, actual politics, and to rally around those points that are actually important to, doesn't matter if you're opposition or Chavismo in this case, as in defending the country, as in being sovereign, as in lifting sanctions, and yeah, and to have the actual real deal as in democracy, as in just not playing to disrupt everything, but actually doing politics and be patient about it and take care of their own base because it's also pretty dangerous. You can see a lot of people. There's a lot of extremism, destructive, nihilist kind of speech also.
And that's
coming
thanks
the
to
social
U.S.
media.
involvement. That's a direct result of U.S. meddling in Venezuelan affairs. And if there's anything I've learned over my past year of spending a lot of time in Venezuela and also studying the issue very closely, it's that if the U.S. were removed from the situation, there is an opposition that could function, coexist with the government. There could be a democracy where one party wins, one party loses an election, and they work together and actually think about what's best for their countrymen as opposed to what's best for Washington. And unfortunately, as long as the United States supports figures like Guaidó, parties such as Voluntad Popular and Primera Justicia, then that other opposition is completely sidelined. And so it's our responsibility in the United States as U.S. citizens to oppose the policies of our government, not only in terms of support for these extremist opposition parties, but also there is a war on Venezuela through sanctions, and there's a theft that's happened in broad daylight of Venezuela's internationally stored wealth as a result of this coup. So even if they haven't changed the situation on the ground in Caracas, they have actually transferred billions of dollars worth of Venezuela's money into the hands of the U.S. Treasury, into the hands of sketchy figures such as Carlos Vecchio, who you and I did a piece about. But just to wrap, I think that's the important message for U.S. citizens. We have to not only resist our government support for the coup, but also end these sanctions, which have completely cut Venezuela off from the international community and made life so much more difficult for people like you and everyone who live in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of things that are going on that simply people don't deserve. It doesn't matter how they politically think about them. You know, that's the main thing. There's a lot of innocent people suffering, and you can easily think about a lot of mistakes or whatever or mismanagement or any of that kind of things on the part of the government, for example. But that's not enough to explain all this what's going on. It's not enough to actually build up a thorough picture of what's going on here. And once you actually use the magnifying glass, you realize that actually what's actually harming the most is it's the economic terrorism that's been going on before sanctions and after during this whole sanctioned Venezuela cycle also. So, but we're still here, and I think and there's no chaos in a region that actually it's kind of breaking down because the whole neoliberal consensus all around us actually is making people move, and we are also being strongly and severely, violently repressed in other countries such as Colombia or Chile or Ecuador. I mean, but I think there's even thinking about the people back there at the States, the good people there, because there's a lot of them too. Here's the thing. You have to bear in mind that last year, the U.S. tried at least, you can count around 8, 9, 10 regime change attempts all across the world, being successful at least in one of them, Bolivia, which is like the tragic note of last year, and also from this year. But you have Bolivia, and perhaps, well, in the short-term sense of the word, you have the extrajudicial killing of General Qasem Soleimani back in January the 3rd, as only the main big moments. But so what do you have? You have an empire that's not able to regime change successfully anymore almost everywhere. Venezuela had but what Venezuela did, and I don't know if it's a conscious way because history is opaque, but when Venezuela contributed hugely to showing this, that the emperor, it's not only that the emperor doesn't have any clothing, he doesn't have any tailor anymore, you know? And besides that, but the good thing and also the dangerous part of it is that if you fail, if the U.S. Foreign policy and military industrial complex regime change machine isn't that successful, we already know, this is something I'm saying, I say this all the time, but I don't get tired of saying it either. But we all know what happens if they're successful, but no one actually knows what happens if they fail. And I think we're kind of in that point now, so that's going to produce some sort of void that needs to be filled some way or another. And I think that's globally, if we're able to do it, if we're able to pull it off, it's a big opportunity. And I know it kind of sounds naive, but I don't know. Last year we were thinking we thought about the country being in a whole lot more trouble by the end of the year, and that wasn't the case. And I think another countries can say the same thing. And I'm thinking about countries that actually went through worse, such as Syria, for example.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of new things we have to do. There's a lot of ways. There's a need to fill this new void that's going to come out of this short circuit of U.S. foreign policy.
Well, that's what you guys are working to do at Misión Verdad. It's what we're doing here at the Grayzone. So we're going to keep working together. Diego Sequeira, always great to talk to you. I miss you. And I hope to see you soon in Venezuela.
We will. I'm pretty sure about that. And we'll be happy to have you here one more time.
Not one more time, many more.
Yeah, many more. That's it.
We'll talk soon, Diego. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.